John Hook and he talked, and while John Hook had not heard the program, he certainly knew something about beach music. As a matter of fact, at his wife's insistence, he had sold the bulk of his library just a couple of weeks before. He had about 14,000 recordings, and he had sold over 12,000. Before it was all over, John Hook went back and bought his music back from the man that he'd sold it to. So he wound up with about 14,000 recordings, and there began the genesis of sufficient supply of music. Now, the thing that happened along the road was we found collectors. And one day this guy drove into the radio station in a Toyota van. As I recall, he had about 9,000 pieces of music in that van, beach music. His name was Curtis Carpenter. Well, I didn't let him get out of the driveway because I realized that with the music that he had, plus the other sources, and he was a collector, the other sources that we had, that here was the nucleus of sufficient music to program a radio station. Carpenter didn't really want the job, but he wanted his music to be heard. As a collector, he knew the value of exposure of the music he had. We cut a deal. As a matter of fact, we cut a deal such as was sort of unusual. He needed a place to live, and it so happened my mother-in-law had a spare bedroom, and before he left town, he had a job and a place to live. And that was a very satisfactory arrangement. And I guess the biggest kahuna, the biggest find that we had was a fellow by the name of Frankie Castellano. Frankie Castellano was living in Charlotte. We later learned he had a master's degree in history, but he also had something else. He probably had 42,000 pieces of music. He virtually had everything that had ever been recorded anywhere in the United States that could be passed off as beach music. Well, we made Frankie Castellano a proposition. We'll put you on the air if you'll give us access to your music. He agreed, we did, and we had then all the music that any radio station could ever hope to get in the beach music realm. No one could compete with us unless they did what we did, and that's find the collectors. And when we found the collectors, I made them all a job proposition. And fortunately for WRDX, virtually every one of them accepted, and every one of them went on the air. And what we found was not only their music, but we found people who knew the music, and our audience responded because they knew they were talking to authentic people who knew the musicians, they knew the music, they knew the people who had performed, the talent, and they could talk about them. They could talk about them in the first person because they knew them personally, and that changed everything. And that's how WRDX became not X106. X didn't have a meaning, but Beach 106 did, and Beach 106 took off. And it generated an audience that people still talk to me about to this day, some 12 years later, as how much they miss it, because it was a lifestyle. It was something the listener, participated in through the beach music concerts, the SOS meetings at the beach, as well as the shaggers, the shag clubs they were part of. Well, over a period of time, we realized that we had to develop some way of promoting the music. And what we did was use those 800 numbers. And we let people call us and tell us what they wanted to hear. They wanted to know where the bands were playing, where the shaggers were dancing, that sort of information. And then we got involved very rapidly with the Society of Stranders. SOS stands for Society of Stranders. And this was a group of shag clubs, and we became their official radio station. We were invited to the beach because they had a gathering in the spring and in the fall and in midwinters. And we were invited to participate. The first time we went down, we were broadcasting live from the beach on Friday and Saturday nights. And the next time we went in the fall, we extended that. We added a Sunday. And by the time we were down there for 3 consecutive years, we were broadcasting from the beach as much as 10 days at a time. And that happened in the spring and the fall and the midwinters, as they call it. We were there for 3 or 4 days over a long weekend in February. And what we didn't realize is we had generated so much activity in the music that shag clubs were being formed. There was a great interest at colleges about, because it was a lifestyle, it was a social lifestyle that college students enjoyed, the camaraderie that they enjoyed with their peers, as well as an older group of people who were dancers. All of those things sort of came together to create a reawakening of something that many people thought had simply left. The music was recorded, I'd say beach music was recorded by 85 to 90% of the bands were black, and 85 to 90% of the audience who admitted listening to it were white. It was an interesting combination. And one day, in a most memorable occasion, 3 well-dressed women from Troy, North Carolina drove into the station about 1:30 in the afternoon. I happened to be at the reception desk when these ladies came in. They were dressed, very well dressed, heels, very neat dresses, and they said they were from Troy, North Carolina, and they really wanted to meet Boo Barron. Well, if you had never heard Boo Barron, you really did not know what this man's background was. I said, sure, come on. I took them back to the control room. We walked in, and you didn't see him immediately because he was behind this wall that was created by a big bunch of bins for music. The shelving was arranged to hold a lot of cartridges. Well, the woman that led the group in came around that big stack of music, and she screamed, "Oh my God, he's white!" And the lady happened to be black. And whenever she recovered, she explained that we had a very large audience in the black community that we didn't know anything about. And we engaged after they left. We agreed to engage in conversation, and she wrote me a letter, which I think I still have a copy of it, about the size and dimensions and how those people far beyond Salisbury loved the music. And there was an audience out there that, until she showed up, we never really knew we had, because they didn't feel free to call the radio station and to ask for information about the bands that they were interested in or the songs that they wanted to hear. And so we sort of had our eyes opened again as to the depth and scope of what we had stumbled across quite by accident. And David Smiley said, "I'll give you a printout of where the calls are from on Monday morning." To measure the audience, we developed a magazine that we call Carolina Class. And the principal reason for that magazine was so that we could show pictures of the crowds that we were drawing. At some of the events, we had concerts. We had as much as 10,000 people in places like Pilot Mountain, which is 50, 60 miles from Salisbury. We had all kinds of events in the region in big hotels like the Marriott in Charlotte, and I forget, we went to places in the mountains at Boone, They were regional, as well as we were going to the beach. And we saw a whole nother dimension, because then as these people realized that we were responding to them, we were playing what they wanted to hear, then we began to realize how big the audience was in an area that wasn't being measured, and that was in the black community. One of the interesting things of all of this that happened was professionals who came through the area. A guy from Denver came through the area one day, and I didn't take the phone call. I wasn't in the office at the time. And he said to the receptionist that he thought we had the best radio station in the region. And I thought, well, that's a bunch of smoke. He's looking for a job. No, he didn't consult with radio stations like ours. He just happened to listen to it. He worked with stations who were into other formats, mostly country as well as religion. But he just wanted us to know that of all the stations that he had heard, he thought that we were the top of the pile. I later talked to the guy a year or so later, and he still felt the same way, which reaffirmed what we had begun to learn, not only from our magazine, which had a circulation of 10,000. It was a controlled circulation magazine. You didn't get it unless you gave us a demographic profile of your household. Well, I'd say most of them gave us what we were looking for. We knew who they were. We even knew what kind of gas they put in the tank of their car, what kind of beer they drank, what kind of jobs they held, what kind of money they made, where they lived, how much education they had. We had a complete 17 demos, cross-section of 10,000 households. Along at that same time, we started opening our 800 lines to full-time requests. And we generated, in an average year, over 190,000 phone calls. And we talked to an average of 557 callers every day for 55 seconds, I think it was. And this is how we generated a profile of who our audience was. That gave us what we thought was a great sales tool. But it turned out to not be accepted by the ad agencies. They wanted to know what our Nielsen numbers were, or what our Pulse numbers were. Well, we don't know what those numbers are, but we know who our listeners are. And some of these people like to go skiing in the mountains, and some of these people like to go to the beach, and some of these people like to dance, and some of these people own motorcycles, and this is who they are. Do you want to talk to them? That was something that the ad agencies in Charlotte and Greensboro and other markets, they did not know how to deal with that. They didn't know what to do with that kind of audience profile. They'd never seen any of that before. But that's what you got whenever you had an audience that was responsive and could access you. They could talk to you because we had live announcers. But this time, all of those fellas that had collected the music, they could talk to people about the music and the artists, and that's what made the professional program consultant out of Denver say, you got the great radio station, the greatest I've heard currently. They were talking to real people who had real knowledge of what the listener was interested in. And that was a revelation to us. And we saw a side of radio and enjoyed a relationship with a large audience, which really, well, there's another story, and I'll tell it at another time. One of the things as you review the 40-some years that you're involved in something like WSTP and WRDX, you look back and you think of all the things that happened, and you wonder how things